Autumn is usually associated with the hunting seasons. Talk consists of the deer herd or the thunder of flushing ruffed grouse. It's generally a happy time for sportsmen, unless, of course, they're an ardent fly fisherman. This upcoming Saturday is that long-awaited day, the opening of the general trout season here in Michigan. It's been a trying 7 months since the final days of last season.
In his book Anatomy of a Fisherman, John Voelker of Ishpeming, under the pen name of Robert Traver, writes this about the last day. All summer long the spellbound fisherman fishes. By and by his heart is wrenched as he beholds premonitions of the doomed beauty of autumn. Then lo, one day it's the last day of fishing. The very end has come. This is the saddest day of the year. But our annual melancholy is tinged with relief, for the last day of fishing is both sentence and a reprieve. A sentence to a long fishless winter's nap, a reprieve from the mad compulsive chase of summer. By and by we blink and peer about, like men emerging from hypnosis. The gleam of lunacy gradually leaves our eyes. We even tell ourselves it's all for the best. But we lie. On the last day, all fishermen are akin to pallbearers, and worse yet, pallbearers who must macabrely attend their own funeral. For going out on the last day is a melancholy ritual that must be observed, a sad job that must be done, like decently burying the dead. But our hearts are laden, and each cast is like waving farewell forever to our adored trout. For what we enchanted fishermen really want is to go on fishing and fishing and fishing and fishing forever into the very vaults and corridors of heaven. With fishermen, it's always tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. And what sustains us through the long ordeal of winter is the wry knowledge that after all, it's only 8 more months till the magic first day.
I've been fishing out here for over 40 years, and we developed a kind of a ritual of the opener. We come here on the opener, and we generally gather on the close. Some openers we've had to snowshoe in. Even the plows couldn't get us in here. And instead of using plies, we had better off, we brought ice picks sometimes. But we gather and go through the thing, generally have a little friendly bet. Sometimes the bet isn't won most of the time on the first day. And on the last day, we gather too. And the fishing is generally a little better because there's no ice in the way at the end of September. And friendly little bet. Then we generally eat out here, take snapshots, which frequently don't turn out, and separate.
Famous for his well-equipped vehicles and his Italian cigars, Voelker at age 81 is still very much active. Now, during John's long career, he's accomplished more than most of us ever will. He's been an attorney, county prosecutor, Supreme Court justice, author of a dozen books, and last but not least, world-famous fly fisherman. Now, if 7 is said to be a lucky number, it must be especially lucky for John, in a sort of unusual way. Voelker lost his bid for a 7th term as Marquette County prosecutor when he was defeated in the election. And it turned out to be a blessing in disguise as Voelker took some time out to write the novel that changed his life.
Well, I wrote a book called Anatomy of a Murder once, and it allowed me to write the way I want about what I want. And I discovered that in winter you can't fish, so I kind of dream about it. In fact, one book reviewer has said, I hope with tongue-in-cheek, that my trout books are some of my finest fiction.
His trout books, Trout Magic, Trout Madness, and Anatomy of a Fisherman, are prized possessions among avid fly fishermen. They not only represent some of Voelker's own fishing adventures, but they're also wonderful yarns, set in the Upper Peninsula and spun by one of its greatest natural resources. Are you still mad about trout?
I'm not as mad at them, but I find fishing for brook trout is fascinating. I've been through the big fish deal. I waded probably from here to Miami and back, mostly upstream, and I've kind of given that up now. But I love the brook trout. I think it's one of the most beautiful creatures in nature. I rarely keep one for several reasons. I don't catch so many anymore. On a day like this, on a shallow beaver backwater, they see you a mile away. But it's a nice, fella can't get into too much trouble out fishing. And this way I can have a pop or whatever at 4 o'clock and go home and watch football or see, you know, how the election is coming and well, sometimes they lie under that dock. This cast I'm using is a part roll cast. I guess it's called a double haul. If you try to pick up all your line from out there, it generally lands back in the brambles. But this way, you fish it in and then go into part of the roll cast and make your business cast. No fish, so I give instructions. I'm amazed that we don't see a rise, but I've been amazed often by trout. Boy, the other day there were some beauties rising, and I couldn't reach it, so I built this, and now I can reach it. And they moved. Most weathermen or people say we're having nice weather, meaning it's sunny and warm. Well, most trout fishermen want it to be kind of cool and cloudy. On some days, I even thought of getting 2 balloons to hold an old billboard over the sun. But I couldn't find the balloons. Let's try somewhere else, Buck.
Okay. Voelker rarely leaves his beloved Upper Peninsula, made famous in the film version of his novel, Anatomy of a Murder. And during the trout season, there are few days complete without a quick trip to camp, situated on a beaver pond near the Escanaba River. Now here he can relax and fish, even if the fish don't cooperate.
I fished here at least 40, 50 years, maybe 45. I used to come out here with Carol Rustin and old-timer, Frank Russell, and many others. This used to be open to the public. I tried that, but I got tired of digging out beer cans. So I put up a gate, and the fishing was far better when it was open to the public. Occasionally I'd catch fish, and you saw what happened today.
You've had a wonderful career that spanned district attorney, state Supreme Court justice, author. Was fishing that important? Does it rate up there with the rest of those?
It's one of the most important. Yeah. I fished since I was a kid. He emerged from the woods. Let's try this spring up here. You know any retired beauty queens in Atlantic City that come up here and help out with this boardwalk? There's a log, a submerged log goes out to a deep spring, and sometimes they hang in there. I'll get them lying out here after a bit. That fly was landed right over the spring. But they don't seem to be in the mood. They must have known you brought a camera. They're camera shy, much more than some old fishermen I know. When I was a kid, I only knew one or two fly fishermen, so I think one of the things now is it's really more fun, even if you don't catch fish, on pitching a fly.
Do you ever discuss with other trout fishermen your favorite flies, or is that sort of a secret thing with you?
I rarely do. I carry hundreds of flies. I'm stuck with them now, and I got more in the car. I'm not a fly tyer. It's the fly tyers that really carry on this ritual, and I envy them. One day, one of them asked me, do I tie my own flies? And I said, look, mister, far from being able to tie a fly, I'm barely able to unzip one. He giggled and got the message, yeah. I don't know the names of most of the flies. I tend to say that little, you know, that little fuzzy fly, and oh yes, yes. How'd you do, Lloyd?
Not worth a darn. I rose one fish on a number 20 spent wing spinner.
Do you know the Latin name of it, Lloyd?
I could dig it up for you.
Yeah.
You could have it.
Yeah. I saw a rise when I went to the bridge just now.
Oh, good.
At the first raft.
Good. Well, I saw two rises, one under the bridge and the one down at the end line.
They'll be nice fried in bacon grease.
That one, I think, would have made the...
I've been eating rises lately. Yeah. Well, would you have a small pop or something? Or
Yeah.
something?
That wouldn't
Yeah.
hurt at all.
Come on ahead.
Okay.
John and Hugo had to take off.
Yeah, I understand that.
They're going down the river, I think.
Hugo said he was going down to the river and give it a try.
On certain days when the sun is bright, John will spend his time with other loves like playing cribbage or picking mushrooms. His small camp is oftentimes visited by close friends who come from all walks of life and from all corners of the United States. They all share one common idea, and that's a love for trout fishing. John sums up that love in his Testament of a Fisherman.
I fish because I love to. Because I love the environments where trout are found, which are invariably beautiful, and hate the environments where crowds of people are found, which are invariably ugly. Because of all the television commercials, cocktail parties, and assorted social posturing I thus escape. Because in a world where most men seem to spend their lives doing things they hate, my fishing is at once an endless source of delight and an act of small rebellion. Because trout do not lie or cheat and cannot be bought or bribed or impressed by power, but respond only to quietude and humility and endless patience. Because I suspect that men are going along this way for the last time, and I, for one, don't want to waste the trip. Because mercifully there are no telephones on trout waters. Because only in the woods can I find solitude without loneliness. Because bourbon out of an old tin cup always tastes better out there. Because maybe one day I will catch a mermaid. And finally, not because I regard fishing as being so terribly important, but because I suspect that so many of the other concerns of men are equally unimportant and not nearly so much fun.
Is that the truth?
That's it. Amen. The congregation is dismissed. He emerged from the woods. Let's try this spring up here. Do you know any retired beauty queens in Atlantic City that come up here and help out with this boardwalk?
You've had a wonderful career that spanned district attorney, state Supreme Court justice, author. Was fishing that important? Does it rate up there with the rest of those?
It's one of the most important. Yeah. I've fished since I was a kid. In fact, some critics think my fishing books are some of my finest fishing, and I'm beginning to believe them after fishing like this today. Yeah, it's great fun. I tried to say it in a thing called Testament of a Fisherman. Part of fishing is what you don't have, what you escape. You get out of town, no telephones.
You love the environs where trout are found.
Ah. Yeah, that's a quote, sir. What a cultured man you are.
His wit, one of his trademarks.
His perfect choice of words, his talent. Native Upper Peninsulan John Donaldson Voelker passed away last year at the age of 87, but not before he left his spirit in the hearts and minds of everyone he met, and even those who only knew him as author Robert Traver. John lived life exactly the way he wanted to, and not many can boast about that. Next on Discovering, a heartwarming look back at John and his love of nature's most beautiful creature, the brook trout.
You know, I don't think there's a more beautiful creature in nature than that of the brook trout, and no one knew it better than John D. Voelker of Ishpeming. John passed away last week at the age of 87 of an apparent heart attack in his beloved city of Ishpeming, but not before he had touched the lives of thousands of people. You know, Will Rogers once said, "I never met a man I didn't like." Well, with John, I guess we could say I never met a man who didn't like John. He was just that kind of a person. Very gentle and calm and extremely witty.
At age 18, John already had developed these traits. In the 1922 Ishpeming High School yearbook, Schust, as his friends called him, was a young man of many words and already a fishing fanatic. His senior superlative read, "Like a true fisherman, he has a good line." This modest home located near downtown Ishpeming is where John Voelker grew up. Now, following high school, John went to the University of Michigan, and a few years later he returned to Ishpeming with a law degree. At that time, he again lived in his childhood home. In the late 1950s, John wrote Anatomy of a Murder under the pen name of Robert Traver. Soon, Hollywood turned his novel into a major motion picture, when in 1959, Otto Preminger and a complete cast of stars converged on Ishpeming, and his childhood home was used in the filming as the law offices of Paul Beegler.
brought this soldier by yourself. You've been drinking alone, Molly. I don't like that.
Drop the stone, Counselor. You live in a glass house.
My windows have been busted a long time ago, so I can say as I please.
Have an Italian cigar?
No, thanks. Those stinkweeds are another sign of your decadence. Holly, it's a fact. Since Mitch Ludwig beat you out of the office of public prosecutor, you haven't been worse off for peanuts. Not that I don't understand how you feel. Man gets beat out of an office he's held for a long time. Feels his community is deserted. His finger of scorn is pointed at him.
None but the lonely heart shall know my anguish.
Holly, you're a good lawyer. You ought to make like one. Be here, ready for clients, not out fishing and playing that rooty-tooty jazz.
No, I'm making a living. I run a few abstracts. I divorce Jane Doe from John Doe every once in a while. Threaten a few deadbeats. And in the evening, I sit around and drink bourbon whiskey and read law with Parnell Emmett McCarthy, one of the world's great men.
That was a kind word, Polly.
You know, I think maybe you better cancel all my appointments for today.
What appointments? People think you've migrated into the woods. If this refrigerator gets any more fish in it, it'll swim upstream and spawn all by itself.
Your Honor, would you turn to page 486?
What's that?
Appears to be a law book, Mr. Ludwig. Oh, I'm sorry. I make those things to help me think sometimes.
For perch?
No, it's for frog.
What case is he citing, Judge? We gate frogs down in my part of the country.
Yeah, well, it's the same up here. I'm a trout man myself, but this is a new wrinkle I'm going to try. They do it a lot down in the bayou down south. The idea, they get a great big long pole and about a 10-pound line, just sort of drift along a high bank in a boat. And then you see that great big old bullfrog in a crevice. They'd float this along in front of him. Pop, that old tongue of his snaps out and got frog legs for supper.
Well, I'll be down.
Why don't you keep it? Try it sometime.
Thanks, I will.
I tied them in different stages because Jimmy Stewart was going to be tying a fly in the courtroom. I cut the barbs off the hook so no one would get hurt. And about the second day into the movie, when they were in the court, John came back and said everybody stole the flies for souvenirs, so I had to tie another dozen. And we had kind of a joke out of that. They were large, more like frog jigs, but Otto Preminger had his way. John couldn't have a little trout fly there.
John Peterson Sr. of Ishpeming, better known to his friends as Long John, had supplied flies to Voelker for a half-century. He remembers John as perhaps the most polite person he's ever met. They became good friends and great fishing partners.
He loved to catch fish, and if the more he caught, not that he'd keep over his limit or anything like that, but he loved to eat fish. And he got over that, and then it seemed as if we were always fishing for the big one. The brown trout came back, came in this area, and he was crazy for that big fish. And one day on the Escanaba, he was fishing, and I had tied some Adams for him. And he wrote a little story, and he got this big brown, and he said, "God bless Long John Peterson." I got a kick out of that. And then after that, he just went to the woods mainly for the serenity of it. He just loved the woods, and he'd catch fish. He'd eat some, but the catching of the fish wasn't the important thing anymore. It was 3 phases he went through. And the last time he'd just admire a brook trout and wish every one was a native trout, and he'd put it back.
There, hey, on. Little one. Here's a tiny fish, maybe not big enough to keep legally, and I'm not going to keep him.
People are always asking us, who's the greatest man you've met on the road? Well, here he is.
I'm sorry. Who's going to make it? his feelings are hurt, but he'll make it.
If you enter the life of John Voelker, you see your own life a little differently ever after. As a Michigan Supreme Court justice, he wrote a novel in his spare time under the pen name Robert Traver. Anatomy of a Murder became an all-time bestseller and a great movie. And John Voelker said to himself, wait a minute, why am I sitting here in a courtroom issuing dissenting opinions all day when I could be doing something I love to do?
It's hard to believe, but this pond is full of trout. They've all been to Harvard Business School.
John has made his share of friends over the years, including CBS talent Charles Kuralt, who featured Voelker during his On the Road series. The sad news of his death was heartbreaking to all who loved him, including longtime close friend Bill Nault.
John was probably one of the best fishing partners I ever had. He was the type of fellow that you'd come to a stream, he'd always insist that you fish the best hole, get in there first, and then he would follow. And he was the type of fellow that, well, I've seen him come out of a fishing hole. He'd be smelling of sweat, mosquito dope, swamp water, and get home, sit at a piano and play a Strauss waltz. He was two different persons. When he was in the woods, he had a personality of his own. And like I said, he was one of the best fishermen I ever had. He taught me an awful lot about fishing, casting for trout. He could roll cast a fly farther than I could cast it with a conventional cast. And he was awfully good at finding where the trout were laying. He seemed to be able to read a certain area. He liked to fish ponds, still water mostly, although he did like running water too, fast water. But in his latter years, he started to get a little shaky, and he was afraid to get out into it. But he dearly loved to fish from a boat and just cruise around slowly some pond somewhere.
Well, in addition to his bestseller Anatomy of a Murder, John wrote other novels that many times dealt with the legal profession. Small Town D.A., Laughing Whitefish, People vs. Kirk, and Danny and the Boys. He also penned 3 books on trout fishing, books that are keepsakes to those who own them. And as if he wasn't busy enough writing and fishing, John always managed to get in a few cribbage games each day. And when the mushrooms were in season, he'd be out scouring the forest floor with close friends like Ted Bogdan. The pleasure of his company came from his wit and sense of humor. When I return, we'll hear some of these quips from an interview I did with him in 1984.
And about this unlit cigar, it's the best fly dope I've ever found. It's an Italian cigar. I don't even have to light it. I've seen bees and wasps circle around and then move into the next township when they got near it.
Well, chances are, if you've ever seen John on the road, he was probably driving in a cluttered car, equipped for anything. He had clothes, sleeping bags, fishing equipment, you name it.
For years he drove a Model A, and everybody knew that green Model A because it was sagging at the springs. It would just pack everything. Once in a while we'd be out fishing, he'd say, I know I got that in here. He'd unload half a ton of stuff before he found it, but he had everything in there.
A fella can't get into too much trouble out fishing. I'm not a fly tire. It's the fly tires that really carry on this ritual, and I envy them. One day, one of them asked me, do I tie my own flies? And I said, look, mister, far from being able to tie a fly, I'm barely able to unzip one. He giggled and got the message, yeah. I don't know the names of most of the flies. I tend to say that little, you know, that little fuzzy fly, and oh yes, yes. Cities are crowded, no fun. See, in 5 minutes you can get out in the boondocks around here. And there's no place you can, we haven't seen a car on the roads we've been on today. I think we met one. Yeah, that car that followed us there briefly. Where can you do this in any city? One of my favorites. And the bears love these. Sometimes I have to wrestle them with the tree.
Now these are sugar plums?
Sugar plums. June berries, some call them. They have various names. It's really a bush. I saw a rise when I went to the bridge just now.
Oh, good.
At the first raft.
Good. Well, I saw 2 rises, one under the bridge and the one down at the end line.
They'll be nice fried in bacon, grease.
That one I think would have made the...
I've been eating rises lately.
John's small camp at Frenchman's Pond was the traditional meeting site for all his old fishing buddies. Every opening and closing day, they would meet here for a day of fishing, cribbage, and gab. John's good friend, Ted Bogdan, told me the fellas have decided to carry on this tradition, despite his death. He'd want it that way. You know, John once wrote a paragraph that summed up his feelings about trout fishing. It was called Testament of a Fisherman.
I fish because I love to. Because I love the environments where trout are found, which are invariably beautiful, and hate the environments where crowds of people are found, which are invariably ugly. Because of all the television commercials, cocktail parties, and assorted social posturing I thus escape. Because in a world where most men seem to spend their lives doing things they hate, my fishing is at once an endless source of delight and an act of small rebellion. Because trout do not lie or cheat and cannot be bought or bribed or impressed by power, but respond only to quietude and humility and endless patience. Because I suspect that men are going along this way for the last time, and I, for one, don't want to waste the trip. Because mercifully there are no telephones on trout waters. Because only in the woods can I find solitude without loneliness. Because bourbon out of an old tin cup always tastes better out there. Because maybe one day I will catch a mermaid. And finally, not because I regard fishing as being so terribly important, but because I suspect that so many of the other concerns of men are equally unimportant and not nearly so much fun.
Is that the truth?
That's it. Amen. The congregation is dismissed.